What was the first sound a Roman father hoped to hear when his child was born? If it was the cry of a son, the house would fill with celebration. But if it was the cry of a daughter, the greeting was often quiet, a mix of love and sober acceptance. For in the grand, marble-clad heart of the Roman Empire, a world built on conquest and law, a fundamental truth shaped every life from its very first breath. Your destiny was dictated by your gender. A boy was seen as a new branch of the family tree, a bearer of the legacy, a future citizen, soldier, or senator. He was given his father's name, a testament to his permanent place in the lineage. But a girl was given a feminized version of her father's family name, Julia, if she was from the Julian clan, Claudia, from the Claudians. She was a living marker of her family's line, but a temporary one. Her identity was a reflection, never the source. This was because of the most powerful force in Roman private life, patria potestas, the power of the father. This legal doctrine gave a Roman man absolute authority over his entire household, over his sons, his daughters, his wife, and his slaves. His word was, quite literally, law within the home. He held the power of life and death in his hands. Now, this extreme power was not often exercised to its brutal conclusion, but its existence cast a long shadow. It was the bedrock of a social order that prized control above all else. For a son, this power would eventually loosen, as he grew and became a man and a citizen in his own right. But for a daughter, patria potestas was a chain that simply changed hands. She was considered alieni ioris, subject to the legal authority of another. First, her father. Then, upon marriage, she would often pass into the hand of her husband. Can you imagine the psychological weight of that? To know, from your earliest memories, that you never truly belonged to yourself. Your education was not about cultivating your mind for the forum or the arts, but about learning to manage a household. You were taught to spin wool, to oversee the slaves, to be chaste, modest, and obedient. Your body was not your own. It was a vessel for the future legitimacy of a family line. Your value was intrinsically tied to your virginity before marriage and your fidelity within it. Every glance you gave, every step you took outside the home, was subject to scrutiny. The reputation of your father, and later your husband, rested on your perceived purity. So, while Roman boys dreamed of glories in the Senate or on the battlefield, a Roman girl's world was carefully constructed within the walls of her home. She was prepared for one great, defining moment in her life. The moment she would be transferred from one man's control to another. The moment her name and her life would be officially re-registered. The day of her wedding. Imagine a story so powerful, so terrifying in its moral, that it was told and retold for centuries to every young Roman girl. It was the story of Lucretia, a noblewoman known for her exquisite virtue and loyalty to her husband. While her husband was away at war, another man, seized by a wicked desire, forced his way into her home and into her chambers. He violated her. The next day, Lucretia called her husband and father to her, told them what had happened, and declared, "I will not live as an example of a woman who broke the rules." Then, she drew a dagger and took her own life. Her death was not seen as a tragedy alone. It was held up as the ultimate act of Roman female honor. This was the impossible standard. For a Roman woman, her value was her chastity, and her honor was so fragile that even its violation against her will could be cleansed only by her blood. Her body was not her own. It was a symbol of her family's integrity. This gave rise to the ideal of the univira, a one-man woman. This was the highest praise you could give a matron. It meant she had been married only once, and was utterly, completely faithful, not just in body, but in spirit. Her entire public existence was designed to broadcast this modesty. While her husband wore a loose toga, she was wrapped in a long, cumbersome dress called a stola, a garment that announced her status as a respectable wife. It covered her from neck to feet, her arms concealed. Her appearance in public was meant to be functional, not alluring. Her world was the domus, the home. This was her kingdom and her prison. Here, she was the manager, the materfamilias. She oversaw the slaves, directed the domestic work, and raised the children. Her hands were supposed to be busy, often with wool working. The image of a noblewoman spinning her own wool was a cliché of Roman virtue, a direct link to the legendary early Romans who were tough, simple, and pure. But within these walls, she was never truly alone. The household was full of slaves, cooks, cleaners, nursemaids, and these slaves were the eyes and ears of her husband. They were a living surveillance system. Every conversation she had, every visitor she received, every moment of idleness could be noted and reported. There was no private life, no secret self. Her every action was a performance of virtue, under constant review. The pressure was immense, to be the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect mother, to be silent, obedient, and pure, to exist without desire, without ambition, without a story of your own. But what happened when the performance failed? What became of a woman who, crushed by the weight of this ideal, or perhaps burning with a passion it could not contain, dared to step out of the shadows? Now, step outside the hushed, respectable confines of the Roman home. Follow the husband as he leaves his domus and enters the bustling streets of Rome. The air changes here. It is filled with the smell of food, the noise of commerce, and a palpable sense of male liberty. His path might take him through the Subra, a crowded, vibrant district where the lines between commerce and carnality blurred. Here, in the shadow of grand aqueducts, was a world his wife could never walk in, a world built for his gratification. This was the starkest expression of the Roman double standard. While a wife's fidelity was the cornerstone of family honor, a man's sexual freedom was seen as a natural, even trivial, aspect of his life. His partners were categorized, commodified, and entirely without power over him. First, and most tragically, were the enslaved women and men within his own household. They were not considered persons under the law, but property. Their bodies were at the complete disposal of their master. There was no concept of consent. For an enslaved woman, the constant threat of sexual violence was a brutal fact of her existence. It was a tool of domination, a daily reminder of her status. Any children born from such encounters were not her own. They were born into slavery, adding to the master's wealth. His freedom extended beyond his home. Brothels, or lupanaria, were a common feature of Roman cities, often marked by a phallic symbol above the door. Inside, prostitutes, many of them enslaved, waited in small, cell-like rooms. Their lives were short and brutal, their bodies taxed and registered by the state. They were the public, anonymous outlet for male desire, far removed from the sacred duty of procreation within marriage. Then there were the concubines, a more semi-respectable, long-term arrangement. While not a wife, a concubine was a tolerated partner, often a freedwoman or a woman of lower social status. It was a relationship of convenience and companionship, but it still required no legal commitment from the man. Imagine the quiet humiliation for the Roman matron. She knew, she had to know, the slaves in her house, the whispers in the market, the occasional absence of her husband. It was an open secret she was forced to accept. Her world of strict virtue existed parallel to his world of extensive license. Her value was her purity. His was his power, his imperium, which he demonstrated in the public sphere and in the private realm of his desires. The emotional toll on everyone in this system was profound. The wife lived with a quiet resentment and a fractured sense of self. The enslaved lived in terror, and the children born into this system, whether legitimate heirs or enslaved offspring, were constant reminders of its painful hierarchies. But human spirit is resilient. It rebels. If this was the world men had built for themselves, what happened when women decided they wanted a piece of that freedom for themselves? When the carefully controlled matron decided to write her own story, no matter the cost? What happened when a Roman woman refused to play her assigned role? When the pressure to be perfect cracked, and a real, complex, and desiring human being emerged? The Roman world reacted with a mixture of outrage, fascination, and brutal punishment. Meet Claudia Metelli. She was no obscure matron. She was a patrician from the powerful Claudian family, wealthy, brilliant, and wildly unconventional. Ancient sources, filtered through the bitter pen of the orator Cicero, paint her as a notorious seductress. After her husband's death, she did not retreat into chaste widowhood. Instead, she reportedly took lovers openly, hosted lavish parties at her villa, and became the muse and torment of the poet Catullus. He wrote of her as Lesbia, pouring out poems of obsessive love and furious hatred. I hate and I love. You may well ask why I do so. I do not know, but I feel it happening and am in agony. To the traditional Roman elite, Claudia was a monster. She wielded her sexuality and intellect as weapons, operating with a freedom reserved for men. Cicero, in a brutal courtroom speech defending her former lover, accused her of everything from poisoning her husband to incest. Her story shows us the price of defiance, social annihilation. Then there was the ultimate cautionary tale, Empress Messalina, the young wife of the Emperor Claudius. The histories, written by her enemies, depict a woman of insatiable appetite. They claim she would sneak out of the palace to work in a brothel under a false name, and even challenged a famous prostitute to a contest to see who could satisfy the most men in a single night. Whether these stories are true or political slander, they reveal a deep-seated terror of female autonomy, especially when it resided in a woman with supreme power. Messalina's alleged rebellion ended in a violent death, ordered by her own husband. The state could not tolerate such chaos. The first emperor, Augustus, was so alarmed by the erosion of traditional morals and the declining birth rate among the aristocracy that he passed a series of harsh laws. The Lex Julia criminalized adultery not as a private matter, but as a crime against the state. For a woman, the consequences were dire. If convicted, she was exiled to a barren island, lost half her dowry and a third of her property, and could never marry a freeborn man again. Her father were even legally permitted to kill her and her lover if he caught them in the act. The law empowered informers and created a culture of suspicion, turning every citizen into a potential enforcer of public morality. It was the empire's heavy-handed attempt to force the genie of female independence back into the bottle. But the law, for all its force, also created a strange paradox. In its zeal to control women, it began to offer a glimmer of something they never had before, a legal identity. Because to regulate something, you must first define it. Imagine a different kind of Roman woman, not a scandalous noble, but a widow. Her husband has died, and if she was fortunate, he had emancipated her in his will, or she had borne the 3 children required by Augustus' laws to earn her freedom. She was now sui iuris under her own legal power. For the first time in her life, she could own property in her own name. She could manage her own finances, buy and sell land, and even bequeath her wealth as she saw fit. This was the closest a Roman woman could get to true autonomy. She might have a male guardian, a tutor, but by the height of the empire, his role was often a formality, a rubber stamp for her decisions. She could run a business, fund public works, and live in a house without a man's direct oversight. This was the legal loophole, the hard-won space for breath. But this freedom came with its own heavy price. Society viewed her with deep suspicion. A woman without a man was an anomaly, a potential threat to the social order. If she was wealthy, she became a target for every fortune hunter in Rome, men who saw her not as a person, but as a path to easy wealth and status. Her judgment was constantly questioned. Could a woman truly be trusted to manage such affairs? Was her independence just a step away from licentiousness? Her life became a careful balancing act. To enjoy her hard-won autonomy, she still had to perform enough public virtue to avoid scandal. She had to be shrewd, but not too shrewd. Independent, but not too bold. This was the ultimate contradiction of a Roman woman's life. Her path to a semblance of self was paved with the approval of men through widowhood or childbirth. It was never a right she could claim purely for herself. And so, 2 parallel worlds existed under the same Roman sun. One world was for the men a world of public office, military command, legal personhood, and sexual liberty. It was a world of outward expansion and undeniable agency. The other world, the woman's world, was one of intricate boundaries. It was a life spent navigating the narrow space between the absolute control of patria potestas and the precarious independence of being sui iuris, between the celebrated ideal of the chaste univira and the damned reality of the scandalous divorcee. Their stories are not just ancient history, they are a powerful mirror. How much of that duality still echoes in our world today, in the expectations placed on women, in the judgments passed on their choices, in the quiet, often invisible, structures that shape a life? The struggle of these women to own their names, their bodies, and their destinies is a story that has been thousands of years in the making. And in understanding their world, we understand the long, slow arc of history that has led to our own. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the Roman household. If this story of resilience and the long quest for agency resonated with you, please give this video a like. It helps us continue to bring these hidden histories to light. Subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments, which Roman woman's story did you find most compelling? Well, see you in the next video.